Barcelona testing always creates noise. Lap times flash across headlines, mileage numbers get compared, and fans rush to rank teams before a single race weekend has even begun. But day 2 of running this year didn't stand out because of what was loud. It stood out because of how quiet it was. On paper, the story looked ordinary. Changeable weather, a limited dry window, mixed programs across the grid. And yet, when that brief dry window appeared, Max Verstappen delivered the fastest lap of the session almost immediately. Not after hours of setup work, not after visible experimentation, just clean, controlled performance. That's what made it unusual. This was Verstappen's first proper day in the RB22 during the test. No bedding-in day, no gradual ramp-up, and still, the car looked settled from the first meaningful run. There were no exaggerated steering corrections, no obvious traction struggles, and no sense that Verstappen was driving around a limitation. The RB22 looked like it already knew where it wanted to operate. In a normal season, that might not mean much. But this is not a normal season. This is the opening phase of a new regulation cycle, one that reshapes both aerodynamics and power units, with far greater emphasis on energy management and electrical deployment. In years like this, teams usually spend early testing simply trying to locate a usable operating window. Red Bull didn't look like it was searching. Even the conditions worked against clarity. Rain arrived early and stayed, limiting long runs and correlation work. And yet, Red Bull appeared satisfied long before the weather closed the track. Verstappen's contribution was brief, structured, and decisive. This wasn't about chasing a headline lap time. It looked more like a confirmation exercise, checking that the car behaved exactly as simulations predicted. That distinction matters, because testing is rarely about symmetry. One team may chase mileage, another may chase understanding. Red Bull appeared to be checking answers, not asking questions. And the lap times alone don't explain why that should make the rest of the grid uncomfortable. If you only look at the timing screens, Barcelona Day 2 looks misleading. Verstappen's best lap, a 1 minute 19.5 seconds, came during the short dry period in the morning. Ferrari, running in similar conditions, was slower, with Charles Leclerc circulating in the low 1 minute 20 seconds. But Ferrari completed far more laps, logging over twice Verstappen's total. If you're enjoying these deep Formula One breakdowns, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Videos like this take serious research, and subscribing means you won't miss what's coming next. On the surface, that imbalance should stop anyone from drawing conclusions. But Formula One testing has never been about fairness. It's about intent. Ferrari's program was openly conservative. Their priority was mileage and systems validation on a car packed with new components. Leclerc himself admitted the focus wasn't performance, but confirming that everything worked as expected. That approach makes sense in the early phase of a regulation reset. Red Bull's approach was fundamentally different. Verstappen's run was short, precise, and targeted. There was no visual sense of him chasing lap time, no sliding, no corrections, no obvious adaptation phase. The RB22 simply looked predictable from the outset. That's significant because predictability is the hardest thing to achieve early in a new regulation era. Performance can be found later. Usability cannot be rushed. Red Bull didn't need Verstappen to run long. It didn't need him to explore the limits. It needed confirmation that the car behaved within a narrow operating range. And that confirmation arrived quickly. The rain that followed didn't change that conclusion. By the time conditions worsened, Red Bull's priority work was already done. The afternoon was handed over to a younger driver for experience running in wet conditions, not performance exploration. Even the late crash, which ended Red Bull's day early, didn't alter the broader picture. The meaningful work had already been banked. This wasn't a team scrambling to understand a new machine. It was a team checking that its homework was correct. And that confidence didn't come from nowhere. It reflects how Red Bull sees Verstappen's role in this new era. Red Bull's leadership has been unusually open about how central Max Verstappen is to their 2026 thinking. Team principal Laurent Mekies has described what he calls Verstappen's triple advantage: commitment, feel, and decision-making power. That last part is critical. Under the upcoming regulations, drivers will influence performance far more directly than in recent seasons. Energy management, electrical deployment, and system coordination become central to lap time. The driver isn't just executing instructions anymore, they're managing the car as a complex system. Mekies has stated plainly that Verstappen is involved in every major discussion, every analysis, and every risk decision. His feedback doesn't just describe problems, it shapes development direction. Barcelona Day 2 offered a practical example of that philosophy. Verstappen wasn't there to explore extremes. He was there to validate. Red Bull needed to know whether the car sat where the simulation said it would, and whether it responded predictably to input. The lap time was a byproduct, not the goal. That kind of role becomes even more valuable when conditions are inconsistent. Limited dry running, shifting grip levels, and interrupted programs usually create confusion. Instead, Red Bull extracted clarity. Verstappen didn't look like a driver learning a new car. He looked like a driver continuing a conversation that had already started long before the car arrived in Spain, inside simulators, debrief rooms, and design meetings. That continuity is rare, and history shows that continuity often decides the opening phase of a regulation cycle. Formula One's past is filled with regulation resets that reshuffled the competitive order overnight. The teams that started strong weren't always the ones with the most extreme ideas, but the ones whose ideas worked immediately. In 2014, some teams chased innovation and struggled for correlation. Others prioritized usability and raced well from day one. The same pattern repeated in 2022 with ground effect cars. Early races are rarely won by teams still searching for balance. They're won by teams whose cars are immediately workable. That's why Barcelona Day 2 matters more for what it didn't show than what it did. There was very little visible experimentation from Red Bull. No aggressive setup swings, no obvious troubleshooting, no signs of a team feeling its way through uncertainty. This doesn't guarantee dominance. Weather, fuel loads, and missing competitors distort the picture. Several major teams didn't run that day at all, and Red Bull itself lost valuable wet running data after the afternoon crash. But testing isn't about certainty, it's about probability. And the probability needle shifted slightly in one direction, not because Verstappen topped the timesheets, but because of how effortlessly he did so, which raises the uncomfortable question now hanging over the rest of the grid. When teams struggle in testing, it's obvious. Cars bounce, drivers complain, engineers scramble. When teams dominate, it's also obvious. Headline lap times, long runs, visible confidence. What's rarer is something in between, a quiet day where a car looks immediately usable. A driver needs minimal adaptation, and the team leaves early having learned exactly what it needed. That's what Barcelona Day 2 looked like for Red Bull. Verstappen completed fewer than 30 laps, yet still defined the reference. He didn't chase performance, he confirmed behavior. And once that confirmation arrived, there was no urgency to continue. Even Verstappen's own comments reflected restraint. He acknowledged the scale of the regulation changes and stressed that no one truly knows where they stand yet. There was no bravado, no exaggeration. But words don't erase visuals. And visually, Verstappen didn't look like someone feeling his way into a new cycle. He looked comfortable, dangerously so. So is this just an unrepresentative snapshot, or the first warning sign of something more familiar? Barcelona Day 2 doesn't crown a champion. It doesn't lock in the competitive order. Too many variables remain unknown. Fuel loads, engine modes, weather, and absent teams all cloud the picture. But testing isn't about answers, it's about signals. And the signal from that morning session was subtle but meaningful. When a driver of Verstappen's caliber steps into a brand new car, runs a limited program, and still looks immediately at home, it suggests the foundations are already doing much of the work. Foundations matter more than peak performance early in a cycle. Once they're set correctly, they're hard to undermine quickly. So the question now facing the paddock isn't whether Red Bull was fastest on Day 2. It's whether this new regulation era is starting from a disturbingly familiar place, with Max Verstappen once again holding an advantage that's structural, not situational. Was Barcelona Day 2 just a calm, well-managed test day, or the first quiet sign that the next era may already have a reference point? Now, if you want to see how Max Verstappen's footwork gives him a legal edge under the 2026 regulations, check out how Max's footwork breaks the new 2026 F1 rules in a legal way. That video breaks down braking technique, energy harvesting, and pedal control, showing how Verstappen turns regulation limits into performance gains without crossing the rulebook. This video explains what the rules changed. That one shows how Max is already exploiting them.